Good to see all of you. I am Simone Lightfoot. It's so good to be with you. Wow, this is all that I heard it was going to be. You know, there's a thing that my mother taught me. She talked about the significance of one's reputation and how that reputation precedes you, whether people know you or not. She talked about how we represented her when we left the house, whether people knew her or not. And so when I told people that I was going to be speaking at River Rally, I started getting these ooh comments. And the first couple times you kind of, yeah, okay. But when you start getting people like Diane Ridgely, where's Diane? Diane Ridgely with the National Wildlife Federation. She's not with us. When you start getting people like Jamana Vassie with the Mott Foundation, when you start getting people like Dr. Dorcita Taylor, when those folks say, ooh, then you go back and you start studying a little more about River Rally. And you all have a reputation that precedes you. It clearly comes from the work that each of you have done. I did a little more digging and studying because I realized this just wasn't an ordinary speech. This was going to be talking to some frontline soldiers, some folk who are on the battlefield daily, day in, day out. And one of the upsides of that is we know what we know. One of the downsides of that is we get to see the carnage. We get to see the pain. We get to see things before others see it. We get to yell before others are ready to hear it. We get to do the work while others get to enjoy the benefit. River Rally, I just want to tell you, as I've done the studying, I've had the opportunity to walk around and just to look out at all of you. You all are all that your reputation says that you are. And I look forward to us engaging in this panel discussion. And it's going to be a discussion because I'd like to hear from you all as well, as I'm sure our panelists would. You're all that I heard you were. And so when people say, ooh, I too will be in that number next year, whoever they have up here saying, ooh, so good to be with you. We have a little traffic issue with one. I don't know if you are aware, but when I was coming up this morning, I unfortunately saw an accident. It was a U-Haul van ran right into the back of a big 18-wheeler. And it was one of those things you don't want to look at. I'm a military girl, served under Daddy Bush the first time we went over to the Middle East. But even as I get older, I was younger and dumber then. I was about 19 years old. But as I get older, I realize the significance of safeguarding one's spirit and safeguarding the things that we allow in. As I get older, I don't want to see everything. I don't need to see the level of carnage that maybe used to wouldn't bother me. It bothers me now. And so I drove straight, not looking to my right, to the van as I was passing by because I already could tell with the fire, the flames. So Mike Harris, one of our panelists, is stuck in traffic. He and I are talking back and forth. They have him rerouted through a little town that he hopes his navigation system knows about. And he will attempt to join us as soon as he possibly can. But we have some stalwarts that can stand in just fine until Mike arrives. We look forward to Mike's perspective as he will bring us straight from Flint. Look forward to that. This other lady is sitting out there. She's in all her white. I didn't get the memo to do the white thing. I would have. Monica Lewis-Patrick. Can you come on up here, Monica, while we talk about you? You all know Monica. Talk about a reputation preceding one. Monica Lewis-Patrick is a frontline soldier, and one of the things that she's known for doing is speaking truth to power. And so we fully expect that she will do that. We know that we talk offline. We know we're among friends in this audience. And one of the things that I'm hoping that we allow for you to do is to leave with some answers, some solutions that you can take back home in the work that you do. It's important to know what we do, and that's fine, but you can read about that. It's important that we hear from you as well. I hope we get to shape your perspective and push you a little bit outside of your comfort zone. I always talk about how it's important that we move from that question, are we moving outside of our mission? Usually when we're sitting around tables and we're talking, that first person who asked that question, when we say things like we need to be in Flint, that first person who says, well, aren't we moving outside of our mission? You might be that mission impediment. I just want to be very clear. It's important in this time, these times we're in, you need to lean in. You need to find a way, not absolve yourselves. We need to find a way. Monica Lewis Patrick always finds a way. Monica, you don't mind if I won't read your bio in here, will you? You're like me, huh? Let's just get down to the nitty-gritty. Let's talk. And we next have Miss Angela. Where's Angela? She's still over there? Angie Rosser. Thank you so much for joining us from West Virginia. Yeah. Holy moly. Isn't that something? I love this.
Wild and wonderful.
I resisted these for a long time. I kept telling my husband when we would go to church that they were making the print in the Bible smaller. He told me no. I needed my glasses. Ladies, we're just going to jump right in. We're going to talk about water, and we're going to talk about affordability. And we're going to talk about water differently than maybe many of us think about it. And I want to hear from you, talk from your experience. When you hear water, you hear what? Angie, tell us. When you hear water, what do you hear?
I hear water as the foundation of life. I hear water as a litmus test in terms of quality in our society, who has access and who doesn't. And I hear water as something that is universally unifying. Obviously, we all need it. So all of that combined tells me there's opportunities to explore.
Absolutely unifying it is. Monica Lewis Patrick, tell us when you hear water.
When I hear water, it takes me back to 2014. When during the bankruptcy, Judge Rhodes told us that he knew that imminent harm was going to be created by shutting off water, but it was more important for the revitalization of the 7.2 miles of downtown than it was to make sure that the citizens in the neighborhoods of Detroit had access to water. I also think of the late Charity Hicks, who had been a longtime water and food expert in the city of Detroit, who had almost a decade before then had rung the bell that there needed to be a more equitable way that we were making sure that all people had access to safe, clean, and affordable water. So I can't drink water, I can't touch water, I can't bathe, I can't see a fountain without thinking about the thousands and thousands of Detroiters that don't have access, and then the tens of thousands of more people throughout the state of Michigan that aren't going to have access to water, the 35% of Americans in the next 5 years that won't be able to afford their water.
There's a difference between water affordability, a water affordability plan, if you will, and a difference between water access, if you will. Talk to us about a water affordability plan versus what we call benevolence, or is relied on benevolence in the city of Detroit. The plans are codified in policy. Right. If we do an affordability plan based on your income, is that significant? Talk to us about water affordability.
Well, what we know in the city of Detroit is that a water affordability plan would mean that all persons would participate in contributing financially to having access to water. If you look at over 10 years ago through Michigan Welfare Rights and the People's Water Board in the city of Detroit, a water affordability plan was drafted, and it was supported by an economist by the name of Roger Colton. Roger Colton has advised the EPA, and according to EPA standards, you should not be paying more than 3.7% of your income for water. In Detroit, the average Detroiter is paying about 10 to 15% of their income to access water. If you look at the demographics of the city of Detroit, about 49% of the city is living at or below poverty. So what you have is you have a systemic issue where there are thousands of households. Right now, we're looking at 18,000 households being shut off just this year. What we know is since the year of 2012, over 100,000 households have been shut off from access to water just directly based on the fact that they cannot afford it. You also have to factor in the fact that Detroiters pay, our water rates have increased to the tune of 120% over the last 10 years. So even looking at just the numbers, it makes it very clear that the cost of water is increasing, but the incomes of most of the citizens living in the city have not. And so it makes this disparity in terms of being able to pay for water, while we're also being held responsible to subsidize and be indebted for water for the region. Many of the people, over 126 municipalities and townships, get their water source from the city of Detroit. Many of them purchase their water, all of them purchase their water wholesale. Detroit sells the water wholesale, but their own municipalities are marking the water up anywhere from 100 to 1,000%. So you even have a greater racial divide between what's happening in Detroit and what's happening throughout the region in terms of water equity and water access. We have created a plan called the Water Affordability Plan. That plan is the same plan that Philadelphia just enacted into law. It's the same exact wording, phraseology. They actually sought us out to get that plan. And so what we're hoping is that with the leadership of Congressman Conyers, that all of you will support a new policy called the Water Act. We believe that the Water Act has embedded in it ways that we can make sure that we're providing water in an efficient and responsible manner, but there should not be one person in this country that doesn't have equal access to water.
Thank you so much. Angie, talk about it when Monica's talking about affordability as it relates to West Virginia. Talk about it outside of the context of Detroit.
Yeah, so West Virginia is a largely rural state, so we're in kind of a different kind of demographic and systemic structure. We've got a legacy of private well systems being contaminated by extractive industries. So there is an issue in parts of our state where there's no access to any kind of public water system. And then there's contamination of private systems. So what is the alternative there? I just, in West Virginia, also experienced record flooding in parts of our state. And in my county, which was terribly flooded, many of the private wells were contaminated by the floodwaters, and it's very hard to correct. And I talked with a group of mothers who were dealing with this, and I said, well, let's get you some help. Let's tell somebody about this, and let's get you some bottled water that they couldn't afford. And they said, no, we can't tell anybody because if CPS, Child Protective Services, finds out that I have to keep using my well water that's tainted, they're going to take my kids away.
Yes.
And I was just like floored by this. I had never made those connections. And it goes back to what I heard Dr. Taylor say earlier, is we have to be making these connections between systems, between issues around water accessibility. It's so much more complex than I realized. And then we had our drinking water crisis in 2014 that affected 1 in 5 West Virginians. Our largest public water system was contaminated by a coal cleaning chemical that leaked out of a chemical storage tank. And if you couldn't buy bottled water, we're talking a do not use order for days and for weeks for parts of the affected area. If you could not buy bottled water, if you could not get to a distribution center, Lucretia, my friend up Cabin Creek Holler, she was melting snow and collecting rain to bathe her children. There were the jails, they didn't stop using the water. And that was something that, is it our mission to talk about the injustices done with these jail inmates, and including pregnant inmates who clearly we knew this chemical was a particular danger to pregnant women and children. So Simone, the affordability, the equity, the threats to our drinking water supplies, the lack of government accountability, it's just multiple layers there that I think we need to unpack and be able to be in different spaces with people talking about the layers of all of those issues.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. We need to unpack. There's a lot of unpacking that needs to be done. As a person of color in this work, one of a few, Dr. Dorceta Taylor has done the studies and others. Monica and I talk about it. Rhonda and I, we can name each other. We all know each other. What we struggle with, one of the things that's a struggle is to have our white counterparts, as great as they are, just get it, just realize. Come into Detroit with ideas on thoughts around things like scalability. Oh, we can't do that project because it doesn't have scale. Well, you're not going to get scale in a post-industrial urban center that was created for industry. And so to think that you're not going to come in and do a pocket for something that works over here that requires a hill. Something over here may work because it requires a valley. Something over there may work because it's clay on that side of town and the foundation needs a wall and a structure. So when I listen to some of the conversations inside the suites, after having come from the streets, they don't meet. And that's a struggle for many of us. That's why we talk about this thing called diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh my goodness. That's like the new 21st century affirmative action word that we're dealing with. That's what I call it. You know, that's what it is. Shuck it down to the cob. We got to figure out ways to get black and brown and urban perspectives in conversations that we have in rooms like this. And this is a nice showing here. This is a wonderful showing. We're getting better. But I've been in the industry a while, and one of the things that I would always tell funders when they would say, well, Simone, how do we get more inclusion? Mandate it. Mandate it. Make it a part of that check. You deliver to every green organization up in here and watch diversity change overnight. Overnight. I know, you see who clapping, don't you? Mm-hmm.
That's right.
That's okay.
That's right.
Because we're experiencing diversity right now. So what I found happen in the industry is funders now are requiring more diversity from the folk they fund. Guess what happens? The phone rings. Simone, do you know anybody? And Mike Harris told us in Sandusky, you can't just go get any old black. You just can't go get any old body and think you're going to get the job done. But one of the first things you have to do is begin to see black and brown people as experts at something. That's a struggle for some of us.
That's right.
And maybe not in this room, but we know some folk who it's a struggle for. When we want to go get hunters and anglers to add them to our cadre of allies, we just make some phone calls. We call our brother-in-law who's a hunter, even though we may not be a hunter. We call our sister who knows an angler, even though we may not be. We just make it happen. But the thing that shocks me is when I'm in rooms with my white colleagues and they say, well, Simone, we got to get more black and brown people. How do we do it? I say, well, you talk to them. You call. We have had, listen, I've been on phone calls where we have strategized about the call that we gonna make. Who gonna talk first? Who gonna talk second? Do you think she gonna like us? Do you think? While they doing that, I get on, find out, I Google, search this particular person we were looking for. Google searched their name, got on the phone call, she wasn't in, got with her secretary, called secretary, asked could I get on the calendar. I had a meeting set up with this person while we were still on mute talking about the conversation we were gonna have about the conversation we were gonna have. It's really about relationships. We have this new word, this new buzzword along with DEI, called authentic relationships. Some of my black friends, we laughed at that when we heard that. Like, oh, Simone, we want to have authentic relationships. I said, what's that? An authentic relationship. But what I tell them after they explain it to me, well, one of the things you do, you want to have an authentic relationship, show up. Don't say nothing, show up. And don't ask for a dang on thing, just show up. You ain't even got to tell them where you're from and all the things you're working on and espouse your significance and how great your organization, all that. Just show up. And then immediately after showing up, bring some resources in the name of human resource
That's right.
and money.
That's right.
Let's be clear. And still, You make relationships before you need them. Not at the time you need them. That's not how it works. That's not authentic anyway. I mean, we can do this thing if it's transactional. That's cool. Just let me know how we doing this. If it's gonna be transactional, you show up with a check before, as soon as I open my door, right there, because that's how we're gonna do this thing. But if it's about a relationship and finding out what's significant to me, and I find out what's significant to you, that takes time. I also told funders they need to account for that. You can't give me a grant in a year and tell me to make miracles in a situation or a community without being there in some amount of time, putting that time and energy in. Monica, talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Talk about the significance of us getting that thing right so that we have less people coming into communities of color and urban centers with all their good, listen, I want to be clear, I know we good folk, but with all our good-hearted and good intentions, we show up and then we're flabbergasted by the things that people are living with and dealing with. And while we're flabbergasted, we still in charge. Isn't that a trip? We come and we look and we assert, and we still get to be in charge while we don't understand what's really happening. We got to see other people as experts, other people are worthy of being in charge of something. Those things that we're not necessarily as proficient in. Talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, Monica, please.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, what I would first say is what equity looks like is that all persons would have a equal access to our water source. That's what equity would look like. Equity would look like, not like what we saw happen in Detroit in 2013 and 12, when people were being totally removed from their water source. The conditions were being blamed on them, while people were touting and celebrating and slapping each other on the back about a grand bargain that ended up being the grand theft of pensions. It ended up being destructive to unions. It ended up taking major assets of the city of Detroit. And then what we also have to talk about is when we deal with funders is that many of the players that we are seeking funding from, a lot of times have funded both sides of the fight. And what happens, and I say this to funders all the time, is that the frontline activists that are tried and true, a lot of times don't show up in the room because they're already expecting the over for the under. They're already anticipating that you're setting them up to give them a $10,000 grant where you're going to require a 30-page report, and then at the end of it, there's not going to be any renewals. What you're going to use is their photos and their videos and their verbs and their messaging,
Yes, sir.
and whatever's hip and hot at the moment, and exploit that to then do a major fundraiser and raise $9 million. And so that's inequity. And those are the things that we're opposed to. But I also would speak to the fact that us frontline activists have to be bold and courageous enough to go in the room and stay in the room till we get what we need. And so one of the things that we do is that any funder that approaches us or that we approach, we start first with telling the truth. Telling the truth to them as to how their work has harmed our community, telling the truth to them as to what they can do to be a better community partner, telling them that it's not contingent upon whether they give us $2 or $2,000, that we're still going to tell the truth. The other thing that we know is that we never set our budget to such a high degree that we have to count on their dollars. So I can stay in the room and tell you the truth about what you're doing or not doing. The other thing is that we've got to be very intentional about intersecting our work, because many of the funders are just what I consider an extension of the corporatized agenda. This is the blood money. This is how they're purging their sins, if you will. So if you look at it from that perspective, what we've done is intentionally intersected our work, not only in Detroit, but with Flint, what's happening in Atlanta, what's happening in Boston, in Baltimore, in West Virginia. One of the first frontline soldiers I met in 2014 at the UN gathering in New York was a woman by the name of Paula Swearingen. Paula was deeply moving in that atmosphere because she talked about the capturing of snow and having to boil it. She shared with us what the struggles were like in terms of being a state that has a one business focus, which is mining, while the rivers are running orange and black. She talked about children 9 years old whose teeth are falling out and who are just walking down the street and their bones are so brittle from the toxicity that they are literally dying. before they're even meeting their 16th birthday. She talked about coal miners afraid of what was going to happen if they lost their jobs because of that one state industry. But at the same time, knowing that all of them are dying from the conditions and the toxicity that's in their water. And so what I would just encourage you to do is that when you got up this morning, you made your coffee and your tea. For those that traveled and bathed your baby and shaved and washed your hair. For those that made them some oatmeal or decided you were going to put those greens on before you left. All of that took water. All of that took water. And what I would say to you, if you've never been into a house and smelt the stench of a person that is unable to flush their toilet, you never forget that smell. You never forget it. If you've ever been and looked into the eyes of a mother who's had to go door to door to door to beg for 8 ounces of water just to make their baby's formula, you never forget that. And what we must understand is our water source is one water. It's one water. I don't care what names we put on it. It's one water. And because it's only one water, then we must understand that we have a stewardship and a debt that we owe for that water. It's our responsibility to ensure that everybody, not just on a local, but in a state, but a national level, that there is not one community and one person in this country that should not have access to that water source. And I'm challenging you to make equity and diversity and inclusion more than a word. I need it to be a verb. I need it to be a verb because we need people to show up. We need you to show up in ways that you have not shown up before, because I promise you that this water fight is the fight of our lifetime, and our children are counting on us to win this fight.
Thank you. Thank you. Good job. I told y'all. Told you. Angie, talk to us about the rural plight. Same plight, different space. Talk to us about the rural plight as it relates to inclusion and equity and diversifying, because rural gets left out as well.
That's right.
Yeah, when I think about the rural plight and inclusion, I think about the phenomenon of invisibility that the people Paula were telling you about. They're invisible. And how do what is our role? And I'm just learning about how to make this a verb, okay? I'm learning just now, thank you. Because what I do realize, what's really clear to me in a place like West Virginia is we cannot do this alone as this environmental issue, okay? Actually trying to do it as environmentalists, that pushes us aside. Now, when I've noticed when we talk about the public health issue, a human rights issue, an equity issue, it's a different vibration. And it's a different group of people who are coming into the room together. So for me, diversity, equity, inclusion is, it's a necessity to do this work. And I'm still trying to figure it out. We thought we were doing great. We got the NAACP president at our source water protection workshop, and he was part of the planning. And he, after the second meeting, he said, Angie, I've been to 2 of your meetings. This is good stuff. When are you going to come to one of our meetings?
Get down. I love that. I asked that at work. We do a lot of sign-on letters at the National Wildlife Federation. Are any of my colleagues here from our office, the National Wildlife Federation? They're not in the room? Okay. There's one? Oh, hi. Dang. I was going to tell y'all something, but no. But we do a lot of sign-on letters at the National Wildlife Federation, wherever the issue is, we reach out to our allies, we leverage our brand, and we get others to sign on saying this is bad, whatever it is, or this is great, whatever it may be. And the one question I asked the other day is, whose letter have we signed on to lately? I mean, we are the big, bad, bold National Wildlife Federation. I get that. I get it. But with that comes a whole lot of extra responsibility, and in some cases, burden. And so when we start talking about solutions, some of the things that we could do different. One thing I learned about growing up in an urban center, single mom, 3 sisters, we used to make stuff. We used to make skateboards. We'd get old skates, take the old wheels off, put them on a piece of board, screw it in. Y'all don't know about it. I see a little gray hair out here. It might be somebody. We would make our skateboards. We made everything because we already knew the answer if we asked for all of this fancy stuff. But one of the benefits of that is that you learn that there's always a way. Now, my mother would say that before she would spank us. She was a disciplinarian. She would say there's always a way, and we couldn't say can't. To this day, I don't say can't. She would make us say I need help, because she said I dare you to say anything that you cannot do. There's nothing you can't do. With God's grace and asking for help, you can do any. And I remember as a young kid, wow, you can't move a mountain. She said, with the right equipment, you can. I mean, she always had an answer. And now I don't even test it because I know it's true. But growing up the way that I did, it was easier for me to make connections to things. Then I went off into the military under Daddy Bush, the first time we went to the Middle East. And I learned that while everyone on that base did not lead the mission, everybody was mission essential. From the chow hall to the pilot, it didn't matter what your job was. You were mission essential at Dover Air Force Base to get that mission accomplished. We're all that way. We're all mission essential. And we have to find ways to lean in. We need to look for some red flags, like if the only thing you ever hear coming out of Detroit is how great Detroit is, but it ain't never from black people. Red flag.
Red flag.
If you hear about a problem in Detroit, and that problem is supposedly solved, but you ain't heard it from black people, red flag. Red flag. When the narrative is so controlled, and it's all good. See, when Kwame Kilpatrick was mayor, you couldn't buy good news about Detroit. Everything was bad. Everything. Cobo Hall was bad. The schools was bad. Everything was bad. Now with the new mayor, you can't buy bad news about Detroit. You hear maybe one day. That's called a controlled narrative. I'm an elected official. I sit on the school board in Ann Arbor. I've been there 7 years, just won re-election this past November. I understand inside, behind the scenes. I understand by day being an activist and by night wishing activists would go home. I get that. I really do, y'all. So when I tell you it's going to be an uphill battle getting elected officials, policymakers to take the onus of things like leaching pipes, that's going to be hard. Because once we own it, we own it. You understand? And when we get elected to office, all of us, we take an allegiance to the office, not the people. Y'all hear me? Y'all get us elected, but once we get up there, we take an oath to the office. Our job is to preserve that office and that office's budget. That's our first priority once we take that oath. That's why it's important that when you elect someone, you stay on them. Because day in and day out, our job is the office and the budget, the office and the budget. So if you don't come and say something to me to make it rise to my radar, I'm dealing with my colleagues on the office and the budget. When y'all come, y'all activists, y'all want me to say something about my colleague. You want me to help indict my colleague. You want me to say something bad about I'm not going to do that. I might have a dog and pony show where I hold a hearing, and then we find no charges, and then everybody is fine, and then, yeah. You see how that works? Y'all know how this works, don't you? Y'all looking at me like y'all don't know how this works. Y'all can handle the truth, can't you? A few good men, you can't handle the truth. Talk to us about policy. That's where I'm going. I was a staffer. I was a deputy chief of staff in the Michigan House of Representatives back just before term limits were ushered in, back when seniority meant something. It was revered. And then term limits came in, and term limits means that they limit the amount of time that you can serve in the legislature. We didn't have that before in Michigan. And so when I say seniority meant something, when you walk through the legislature, depending on how long you've been there, you were in the Capitol. You've been there 20 years, like a Morris Hood or a Ray Murphy or Nelson Saunders. And you've been there, you in the Capitol. And then the young legislators were off in the little small off buildings, off site. Once they changed that, lifted term limits, everybody was new. Nobody knew where the bathroom was. The lobbyists were totally in charge, right? Because in the legislature on the House side, you only get 6 years. By the time you figure out the West Wing from the East Wing of the Capitol, you're out, right? So in your 4th year of service, you got 2 more years left. Now you're trying to jockey for a job, right? So now it's time to move some judgeships from one county to your county so you can get appointed to it. Y'all, come on now. I'm a staffer. I know this stuff goes on. Y'all know this stuff goes on, right? Now we got to move some hospital beds, right? Out of Detroit, maybe out to Beaumont, right? We got to make some adjustments because, see, we need jobs, not just me need a job. My whole crew, my whole caucus is term limited. We all need jobs. And so we're going to use what we need to use to make some adjustments to make things happen. So let's talk about the reality of policy. This is an election year for municipal races. You can get some things out of folks during elections. Y'all know that, don't y'all? Don't y'all know that? Okay, all right. Talk about policy, the significance of it. Start with West Virginia. Are you all so state-focused in West Virginia, or are you more?
We're statewide, but we are centered around policy advocacy work statewide in a very challenging political environment where there's clear polarization between jobs and the environment. You know, it's either this or that. I will say, you know, part of our story with our drinking water crisis is that chemical spill happened to happen the second day of our legislative session. So there were at least 4 legislators I were aware of that sought medical treatment themselves. So they themselves, the policymakers themselves, were affected by the regulation they failed to either pass or implement. I mean, you know, wicked irony going on. So, and there were 300,000 people who were angry and frightened, and you know, we had a challenge to how do you channel all that energy into affecting change. And because of the timing, and because it was clearly having an economic impact, because in West Virginia it's all about we're in an economic crisis, we need jobs. Well, when we fail to protect the water, the capital city shuts down, we lose millions of dollars. So there was strong connections to be made, angry people, and we saw in the wake of that disaster the most protective water reforms we've seen in a generation. Now, 1 year later, lobbyists start organizing. Uh-oh, legislators say, we had a knee-jerk reaction. We overreached. We did something to protect the water. So 1 year later, chipping away, we started regulating above ground storage tanks. Now we only regulate about 12% of those that we started regulating. Source water protection planning, yeah, we got a plan in place, but no money to implement them. So there was this kind of symbolic reaction. And then what it did tell me is that policymakers will respond when the people are watching and pressuring them to. So that was a strong teaching for all of the people who were involved. And you know, one politician we work with explained it like this. He says, politicians, they go out, they hold their finger up in the air, see which way the political winds are blowing. That's how I'm gonna vote. Okay, so it's very, I say over and over again to people, water is political. And what we realized in West Virginia is what we took for granted, that we're gonna have water coming out of the tap. The government's taking care of this. Well, guess what? They weren't taking care of us. And I'm sorry that it took people getting sick to wake us up to this, but it shattered the complacency for a moment. Okay, we're 3 years later and things are fading away in memory. But definitely we have people in West Virginia seeing that for the first time thinking about, oh, my water comes from this river. That's how we start every talk and presentation we do. Do you know where your drinking water comes from? Opens up a whole new conversation.
I love that. I love that. Do you know where your drinking water comes? That's a way to open up a meeting, every meeting. I love those type of simple solutions. I also said that if you control a newsletter of any type in your organization, there should be one space dedicated to Flint for the rest of the year that you will update folk. Find a way to talk about Flint. Yes. You should have relationships with folk from here, and if you don't, call us. We'll put you in touch with some folk on the ground. You can get an update from the ground. That's one way you can, from wherever you are, do something to continue to bring the light on Flint. You're talking about faded memories, faded spotlights. We're very clear when you do this work. We share with Mayor Weaver, we knew that was going to happen. Of course, there's times you couldn't get in Flint. Monica knows that. It was press trucks everywhere. Now you can drive freely. We work to leverage our brand to help generate press for Flint. That's another thing you can do. Help leverage your brand to help generate press for Flint. If you have access to national press, hold press conferences, press calls, so that the national press is getting an update directly from the mayor. She's wonderful. She never says no to an invitation from organizations like ours willing to help. Unfortunately, she's dealing with a recall right now by a citizen, plural. It's amazing how we say one vote matters. One person can create a lot of havoc, too, for the good work she's doing. I see her in the trenches, behind the scenes, and I can truly attest to the hard work she's doing. And so I look forward to her getting past that so she can continue to do the good work. When we talk about governance and policy and legislators, we also have to talk about charters and state constitutions, that when you allow an emergency manager to come in and usurp, it's gone. Governance matters. The work we do, y'all, is all for naught if we say nothing about governance structures. If one man can come in and run a whole city, wipe out the city council, wipe out the mayor, sell off parts of the downtown waterfront for $1, take pensions and kick them out. One man. And my colleagues sat back in so many instances, my friends, my colleagues, well, those people need something. Those people. And what they have yet to realize about black and brown in this country, so goes black and brown, so go the rest of us. Really, truly. And so if you say nothing when it's happening to the blackest city in the country, called Detroit, this thing called the Grand Bargain, don't say nothing when now Illinois is trying to figure out how the whole state can get from up under their pensions. You see how cancer spreads? It metastasizes. It knows no respective person. It just starts in a pocket. It then spreads. Folk can't keep you down, as the saying goes. Can't keep their foot on your neck without staying there with you. They got to stay there too to keep you down. And so when you're watching the narrative all about black and brown, white people gotta go, whoop, red flag. It's coming. It starts there. It's coming. And I need my white men especially. I got some bold white guys I work with, so I egg them on, y'all. I be like, do it, yeah, say it. And to watch the big, tall Jewish men and blonde-haired German men and, yeah, and we're saying, I'm like, yeah, that's right. And I stand in the back and I smile. So I'm not the angry black woman. But we need our men especially to be bolder. Women are doing their thing. I got to say this all across the board. Women are. But I was asking some of the white guys, I'm going to get you on this, but I was asking some of the white guys, I'm like, so what's up with y'all? Like, we talk race very comfortably, I do. And so my white friends talk comfortably too, because they know I'm cool. So I said, what's up with y'all? Why y'all can't tell X, this person, that he holding up progress? Like, we got the money, we got the mandate, we got to deliver, but this one person holding up, well, he's been around for a long time. That's the problem. Come on. Now, the girls, the ladies, we will get together. Let me tell you how ladies do. We'll get together and we'll be like, she got to go. We do. And so we got the firebrands like me, and then we got the smooth ones like E. Mickens over here. We got the ones that, okay, Simone, calm down, we'll figure it out. We'll look at her contract. We'll look at the union regulations, and we'll find out how we can make this adjustment. The men, even after they get a beer, you think they'll go do it. So we need the men to be a little bolder. We may need to create some retirement packages that look nice, that are appealing. I'm just saying, y'all, I'm just saying what I'm saying. As Reverend Hope used to say at NAACP, I'm not talking about nobody, I'm just talking about what I'm talking about. Monica, talk to us about policy. How do you work to get equity and parity when you have a governor who is willing to trample over a state constitution and a brand new charter created in Detroit? He tosses that out and puts in an emergency manager. So you're trying to fight based on rules when you're dealing with somebody who has no respecter of rules. Talk to me about that.
I know, first of all, we need to be clear. Emergency management, some form of emergency management is in 37 states. Detroit was just the beta test. 37 states. So if you're feeling real comfortable, don't. And so what we know from dealing with emergency management in Detroit specifically, but really all across Michigan, is that many communities and municipalities in the state of Michigan had financial crises. Many of them met the measuring stick of being put under emergency management, but they were not placed under emergency management specifically because they were predominantly white communities. What you find is that 53% of the African American population in the state of Michigan has been under some form of emergency management. What you'll also find is that the reason that Flint was poisoned, the reason that Detroit had to go under what I consider a grand theft, is because in the haste of not only policymakers, but millionaires and billionaires being able to seize key assets, waterways, land, that they were fully comfortable with destroying pensions, stealing property under the guise of it's the law, poisoning Flint. Flint was poisoned because Flint was the largest external customer to DWSD, which is the Detroit Water and Sewage Department. Under the Detroit Water and Sewage Department, in over 100 years of running that department, we never poisoned anybody. The other thing you need to know is that Detroit was expanded. We were legislated by the state of Michigan to expand our water system to provide it to 126 municipalities and townships because we were the only city with the bonding capacity to do so. Now that same state has decided that they want to regionalize our water under the Great Lakes Water Authority. We can't leave out the fact, and I know we're in this amazing facility here, but the DeVos family has been a major linchpin in privatizing water. If you look at what's happening in Detroit, they are advising Detroit to privatize the internal operations of that system. What we know is going to happen is that the quality of the water is going to diminish, and we know that the prices are going to increase. They also were part of advising Flint to not use corrosives in the water. They also are part of the M1 rail in downtown Detroit that is being touted as some kind of transportation system when we know it's only going to transport Dan Gilbert's workforce from downtown to the parking garage. You also have Veolia heavily involved in Rizzo trash. That's a part of what's happening in Flint and Detroit and many urban centers. They're privatizing the trash collection. You also have Veolia involved in the privatization of transporting our children to and from school. You can't leave out the fact that the DeVos family is part of privatizing education. You can't leave out the fact that Veolia is a part of privatizing transportation at many of your airports. You cannot leave out the fact that Veolia has been a part of what has happened in most major urban, poor communities, cities, and countries. They're heavily involved in what's happening in Palestine with the denial of water to that population. And so we've got to call these names out, and I know that it makes people uncomfortable, but my job is not to make you comfortable. It's to make you so uncomfortable that you do something. That you do something. Now, if you live in the state of Michigan, You're not going to be able to allow the separation of the issues of privatizing water to be separate from privatizing education. You've got to connect the dots. Intersectionality is a weapon of our warfare. We have to talk about all of these issues. I don't go places and talk about Detroit without mentioning Flint. I also don't go and talk about Flint without mentioning what's happening in West Virginia. I know that my comrades in West Virginia do the same thing for Detroit and Flint. We also do it for Baltimore. We also talk about Atlanta. We don't leave out any community that we have made a connection with from our conversation. So we don't allow you to hide behind, I didn't know. Because if I come, you know. You know. You know what is happening. One of the things that my mother said to me, and she also is a veteran like Simone as well. She served for 24 years with the U.S. Army as a nurse. She retired as a master sergeant, so she is a combat veteran. And one of the things she told me in 2014, she said, shutting off water is an act of war. Get down. And I need that to resonate with you. Shutting off water is an act of war. You're talking about the people of Flint actually paying some of the highest water rates in the country for water they can't consume. But this government is also threatening to take their property and their children if they don't pay. You have that same kind of egregious act happening in Detroit, where we've paid and paid and paid. We're still on the hook for the debt that's being provided water that subsidized the creation of the suburbs. But at the same time, you're going to tell the citizens of Detroit that they don't have a right to drink from that same fountain when we provided water to 3.8 million Michiganders for almost 100 years? So these are the issues that we're grappling with, and we have solutions. We have solutions that actually would change the way we're processing our wastewater. I hope Bob Zimmerman is in the room. We can do it in a more ecological way and a more efficient way. We're not doing that. We have ways where we need to be able, we could have brought the Corps of Engineers in to resolve the Flint issue, but we didn't do that. So glad Mike's here. Handle this, Mike. And then we turn around and we have PU units that could process tens of thousands of gallons of water, but you have a governor that decided that he would only deliver water for a week, and we're looking at 2 more years before Flint's pipes will be restored. So these are the issues that we're grappling with while people decided, and even our president, you know, y'all can love on him as much as you want to, but him drinking, no, clearly, him taking a sip of that water as though that water had been restored and purified and clarified was a slap in the face of all the activists that were really trying to bring attention to how egregious this issue was. We had Snyder on the ropes. Snyder was on the ropes. And now nobody's even talking. They were saying lock him up, put him in jail, marching in front of his house. And that's another thing we've got to do. We've got to get better at sustaining our fight. And what we tend to do, we treat it like Burger King. If we can't have it our way, once we get that Big Mac or that Happy Meal, we move on. We move on. And what I need you to know is that the people of Detroit and Flint are dying from what's happening to them. If you read a report, you can go on our website, We the People of Detroit. There's a report we just released with the Global Health Initiative and the Henry Ford Hospital, where the community, we as activists, had to bring to the doctors and the physicians, similar to what happened in Flint, data that shows that by shutting off water, you're increasing water-associated illnesses in the city of Detroit. So even if you don't live in Detroit, if you just come to the ball game and the basketball and the hockey game, the person that's providing you your hot dog or your beer may have been exposed to hepatitis A. And that's a regional issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are going to take a point of privilege because I don't see Miss Smooth Nicole Silk. Oh, dang it. There she is. Okay, thank you. Mike, talk to us real quickly, Mike, please.
Following Sister Monica is a hard thing, but my name is Michael Harris. Greetings from the wonderful city of Flint, Michigan. And I want to thank all of you for anything you've done. Prayers, which are very wonderful. Water. We still need that help. Nothing has changed in the city of Flint. Now, I'm sure Monica's already said that to you, so let me reiterate the points that she's probably already talked about. People are suffering. Now, you may hear certain things about the problem being solved. That is not the case. We have an internal fight happening in the city of Flint now because a few dollars are coming in from wonderful organizations, my foundation and others, and people who've donated. Now there's a fight about who's going to get the money. Where's the money going? Are you Negroes capable of handling the money? So we have these other issues that are welling up when we have what's going on in Flint, while people suffer. Now, you can see I've got my bottle of water. I travel with this everywhere. If you live in the city of Flint and you ride around in your car, you got water in your car, water in your house, water down your basement, water in your garage, water everywhere. If you are a woman in the city of Flint, you have not taken a bath. I'm going to say that again. If you're a woman in the city of Flint, you have not taken a bath in 3 years. You haven't been able to sit back and relax and get away from the children sometime. It doesn't happen in the city of Flint. You haven't been able to take your little baby, brand new baby. Anybody got a brand new baby here? Congratulations. But if you lived in the city of Flint, you couldn't bathe your wonderful, beautiful child in that water in the city of Flint. Now, we're preaching to the choir. Most everybody here knows what we're talking about. But what are we going to do?
That's right.
What are we going to do as Americans to make this situation go away, or at least make it better? And I urge you to keep the pressure on, to talk about these issues. The problem isn't necessarily with the mayor. We all know what the problem is. We all know who the problem is.
That's right. That's right.
I know sometimes in certain rooms we can't really say it, but we know. So when you can fight those fights, fight those fights. Come up to Flint, see what's going on. Offer your expertise. We need it. Everyone in here in this room offers some type of expertise. Please roll up your sleeves, get your expertise together, make phone calls. You can make things happen in this particular city. Some of us, we don't have all the answers, but we do have plenty of them. I'm sure Monica gave you a couple. Just write them down and start to work on them. We can make a difference in our wonderful city and in the state of Michigan.
Thank you so much, Mike.
I appreciate you all. I wanted you all to have the opportunity to talk to us. And I know we went on and on. Me, being me. Appreciate you being out there. Ms. Sokas here. Oh, there she is. All right, good. 2 questions. Anybody have any questions for, oh, please, yell it loud. Hartford, Connecticut.
And so we do have good water quality because it's drawn from other reservoirs, but there is fighting about water starting to emerge. And a lot of the efforts of the community are focused on I-84 and I-91, and the general, emphasis is on this infrastructure is going to be highways. And I have 2 questions. One, how can we work mission essential for everyone in this room? Because I think we're all on the same page here with you, but we actually are all really tiny little organizations, and we all need to work together, and we all need to work together as a national message for upgrading water infrastructure. Because there's a book out, it's not just Flint, it's Pittsburgh, there's cities all across the country where the water delivery, the water pipes into these cities are aged and they need to be upgraded and they need to stop being overlooked. And we do not need another highway infrastructure project. We need to focus on letting our elected officials know that we need a water infrastructure, a national water upgrade infrastructure project. How do we get there?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm in conversations at the national level all the time, and there is that conversation. Initially, when the sentiment was that we would have a different president at this time, I think the trajectory, everyone had their plans, they were ready. Once the election turned out the way it did, a lot of folks spent the first 3 or 4 months, December, January, February, rewriting their plans and refiguring out what it was that they could actually get done. The thought was that infrastructure would be a top priority, and so many of us had ideas about that. Now, the conversation has changed a little bit, but you're head on, we do need that, because what we're finding in DC especially is if we don't give them the language, they don't have it. Really? We're the experts, and if all of us can agree, or most of us can agree on what some of that language should look like, then we don't allow the divide and conquer to occur. Public water should be in public hands, period. I would think we would all be able to agree on that. Those are the kind of conversations that we need to have. What can we all agree on? Hopefully it's 5 things, ideally. If there were more, that'd be great. But we all need to be singing from the same page as the language, the narrative is being constructed. We don't want infrastructure to mean more pipes and more concrete. That's not necessarily what we want. We want to look at some what we call green solutions to some of the challenges coming down. If we're not saying that ahead of time, if we're not massaging that language with some of the folk that are running for state legislative office right now, because whatever happens, generally, I'm going from old, generally it happens at the federal level, the language gets crafted, and then it comes down to the states. And so there's this need to make sure that our legislators on the ground are doing their due diligence. We have education to do at the state level. Any ideas, though, on making it a national conversation in addition to that, Mike or Karen?
Well, I mean, you know, we have an unfortunate or fortunate ability in the city of Flint to use it as an example. That if we can turn around a city like Flint and change its infrastructure, we can do it anywhere on the planet and definitely anywhere in America. So, you know, I'm touting that because I'm from the city of Flint, and there is the need. We always talk about, you know, where the need is. If you've got a house on fire on the street, that's where the fireman shows up. Flint's on fire, and we need fire people to show up. And not just put the fire out, the house has got to be rebuilt. You know, so, I mean, we're at that level now, but there's so many innovative ideas from so many corridors. They're out there. We've all heard about them. We know what they are, but we've got to make the movement, whether in the private sector or in the foundational sector. We can do these things. It's not impossible. I mean, we put a man on the moon. we can fix water pipes, right?
Talking to an Army man, you can fix everything.
Right.
Thank you all so much for this opportunity. This has been just phenomenal.